Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm really excited about today's video. It's something different than what I usually put out on Sundays. I'm joined by special guest James that I'll introduce in just a moment as we reveal what this video is all about. So, James, why don't you let people know who you are, and then I'll introduce the topic of what we're going into today.
Sure. I'm just a random hobbyist who loves board games and spends a lot of time playing board games. It's something my family's done for years. If you like winning, don't play with my kids. They're brutal. I mean, but I noticed at some point that every game group I encountered, there were people who won a lot, and there were people who didn't win as much. And sometimes that was fine, and sometimes it wasn't as good, depending on who that person was who lost a lot. And I really came to an impression of, wouldn't it be cool if you could help those players? And this might have been at a time when my kids were younger and I was the dominant player. Honestly, these days I need the videos because my kids are one's college age and one's getting there, and yeah, they grew up playing games. They're playing Terraforming Mars at 8 and 9, so by now they are brutal. And but the other thing is, I'm just curious about how games work, and I like to play games enough times that I really feel like I know something about the game. So that's the beginning of it, and then I like videography, so I started doing some YouTube videos. Done them in a couple topics. Board games is the only one anyone was interested in watching. you know, and I've decided now to take it a little more seriously. I did a couple videos a couple years ago. They've done pretty well, and I'm trying to build an audience to talk about strategy and board games. So I'll stop. That's probably enough.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that context. From my point of view, I became aware of James's channel a few weeks ago when he shared that he had put out a video about expeditions strategy. Some tips for people who are kind of getting into the game, but quite a few tips that are kind of deep, advanced strategy tips and advice and recommendations or things to try. And I have had people ask me for that sort of content for a long time. They want to know the deep strategy tips, not just the surface level getting into the game tips. But the getting into the game tips are the ones that I am most familiar with our games, because when I'm typically playing one of my games, I am usually playing with a newer player. And so I'm helping to onboard them into the game. I'm not as good at coming up with those deep strategy tips. And James' video was excellent about that. And so I reached out to James to say if he'd be willing to spend a few minutes with me to talk about a few of those tips from Expeditions, which I'll link to that video in the comments below or the description below. And also James is working on, as we're filming this, he's working on an apiary video. And so he's going to give us a few deep strategy tips for apiary as well that will segue into that video, which will also be linked to in the description below. So if you're interested in either of those games, I'll separate them in the timestamps if you're only interested in one or the other. And you can delve into what James says today and also his deeper thoughts in those videos. So I'm really excited to hear your deep strategy tips, and I'll give a little bit of a perspective as the designer of Expeditions and the publisher, developer of Apiary as we're talking about the games.
Okay.
Should we jump in and go to Expeditions?
Sure, absolutely. So, probably a core observation about Expeditions is that in the late game, you have this nice cycle that forms. You have at that point maybe a couple stars, so your character and your companion are generating 3 power and or guile every time they're played. And if you use your character to solve a quest, that will generate 1 to 4 more power and or guile. And it turns out that that is exactly the average amount of power and guile that appear on a central board space. And so I suspect that wasn't an accident. It creates a little cycle that you can run. You solve a quest, you go meld a couple meteorites, or you upgrade a couple items, and then you go solve another quest, right? You refresh somewhere in there. And, because you might have the wrong kind of power and guile, you may have to do a few gather rounds elsewhere. But, it kind of works out, and the game builds to a big conclusion that way. so how do you set that up in the first half of the game? Well, and here I'll ask Jamey a question. The easiest glory category to score in the game has got to be map tokens. And I bet that's not an accident either, because Jamey needed to motivate players to explore the board and make it, because otherwise it'd slow down at some point, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Encourage players to explore and to give them also a little bit of a sense of progress in the first third of the game.
Yeah. So, the other goal that I talk about as being low-hanging fruit is cards. If I'm going to score meteorites or items, I'm going to end up with 4 of those cards and a couple quests. I have 8 cards. I might as well score the goal.
Right.
And so if you think of that as the pattern of the game, one thing I kind of like about the game, I wanted to ask Jamey about is, the first part, you're exploring, you're learning about your environment, you're learning about your character in effect because you're gathering cards. And, it's nice, it's fun, and it gives you this nice sort of, hey, this is a relaxed game. We can hang out together and build these cool characters. And then somebody, boom, they vanquish at a boast site. They score 2 stars, and you're like, oh, I have to get started now. And then 2 turns later, bam, they've placed 2 meteorites. They've already got 4 vanquish tokens. You're looking over there going, oh my goodness, the game is over. And I just think there's elements of the mechanics of the game that create sort of a classic 2-act narrative structure. And I wonder how you think about that when you're building a game.
Yeah, I definitely, so I think of it in terms of kind of tipping points in the game. And it does play directly into the narrative, where I want players to feel like they're building up to something and then that they're paying off, whether it's like the final third of the game or the final half of the game. But they're building up and then using the things that they've created, using these cards they've accumulated, these cards that maybe they've melded or upgraded, and using that to really have strong, powerful turns for the last third of the game. Like you said, I think it plays into the narrative of going on, like going into the unknown and not knowing what you're getting into, and then knowing what you're into and using that to your benefit, plays into that, as well as the mechanical payoff.
I think it's nice, right? And it was I replayed Scythe a couple times this week. It's been a while, because I do tend to play a game over and over a little bit, so it takes a while to get back sometimes. Beyond just sort of the opulence of Scythe, it's so beautiful. But beyond that, there is this story that comes out of it. This week, it was the story of my daughter killing me over and over. It's still a nice game that has this aspect. I should stop. We're here to talk about strategy. Anyway.
That's true. Yeah. So what's your second? Do you have a second tip for expeditions that you want to go into?
Well, that's just basis. The thing I thought was interesting to talk about as next level would be, when would you do something else? Because this is not a game that has a fixed path. And one thing, I'm holding here a card which is, chart the course north. And this is the only card in the game that has a boast action on it. And if you have this card, I think you play differently. And I'll tell you why. It's because usually I would go ahead and get 8 cards and I get 5 map tokens. I would vanquish a boast site, assuming I can find one. I have the resources. And I would immediately place those 2 stars. It's very action efficient. However, while you're running around getting tokens, you will sometimes have play actions that you can't use that well. And so you could just, really rush map tokens, for example, and then immediately boast that. And now, while I'm gathering cards, I'm getting double the power and guile I would have otherwise. I'm really building up power and guile. And that's nice. And then even when I've got my 8 cards, maybe I don't really need to vanquish a boast site. I only need 1 boast action to score the cards. Maybe I just use this again. And now I'm going in the last half of the game with a lot of power and guile. More than everyone else, because I've been getting double points, and I didn't zero myself out on that first boast action. So that's pretty cool. That gives me a lot of options. Maybe I could go to the north and vanquish 3 tokens at once, which would propel me toward the 7 tokens goal. Or maybe I'm so close to 10 and 10 that I just go ahead and take down the 20 corruption tile. So I just think this card is super great. Every time this card comes out, everyone at the table should sort of lean forward and go, oh, you know, it's a good one. So, and it changes the game. You know, the base strategy I've talked about is, you know, what if you don't draw very good cards? Basically, I'm basically saying, what if you have to use your companion and your character predominantly? Well, there are some great cards in here. So another one that I think is interesting, and this goes across the game, is pretty much any card that gives you a bottom action on the top is interesting, right? And I'm holding here an item that allows you to upgrade. And importantly, it also gives you an extra point every time you upgrade.
Let's see if I can find an image of items while you're talking about it. Yeah.
Cool. So you know, items are worth 3 points apiece on average. If you have this card, suddenly they're worth 4 points apiece. So that makes them worth, you know, 16 points for 4. Much more competitive with meteorites. I think you should be aiming to score 20 points with meteorites. And so that's already good. But the other thing is, might you sneak this card in the first half and upgrade an item early? You know, there's really 2 reasons you don't do that. One is that you want to get 8 cards, and upgrading an item early is 1 card you don't get to count.
Right.
And the other reason is you simply don't have enough power and guile to vanquish the site you need to meld that item. This solves one of those problems, but not necessarily the other one. So I would say in a lot of cases, you're really going to use this card just to have that extra point. This can be the first item you meld or upgrade, I'm sorry. And, you know, that's how to best use this card. There might be exceptions to that. And I want to talk about a potential exception to that. There's a really high scoring strategy in this game that I would love to see work. And I haven't really seen it work yet, but I would love to. It's like a holy grail strategy. And that is, skip cards. We're going to score vanquish tokens, meteorites, items, and 5 map tokens. It would be cool, right? So the question is, you know, you're slower than everyone else. So can you stay ahead in points throughout the game so that no one else has a motivation to close you out too early? And this might be the card for it. This is an item that melds meteorites. And it has the special ability that I get the effect of the meteorite right as I'm melding it. And so that makes you think, I wonder what all those meteorites do. And the first answer to that question is 8 of them. 8 of them give you a card. And so a third of the meteorite deck almost gives you a card. And so that's pretty neat, because the whole reason I didn't want to do this is because I was going to lose a card. But if I can play this and immediately get a card back, I lose nothing. The only challenge of that is that all those cards that give you cards score cards. And so you don't want to play your first meteorite down and score nothing on it. So you can't do this too early, because you have to have enough cards in your control that it scores well. And so it's not perfect, but it does start to sound like that Holy Grail strategy where maybe I could start playing cards underneath my board earlier without slowing down my progress too much. And because I'd have some meteorites scored, people would be afraid to close the game early on me because they'd know I was ahead. So anyway, I wonder if you think any of that has any validity at all, but those were the ideas I had.
I think all of it has validity, absolutely. And I love the idea of keeping an eye out for certain cards and building your strategy around them. I tried to design a bunch of cards like that, where if you had that card, it would push you, either nudge you or push you strongly in a specific direction.
Right.
And you've given some fantastic examples here.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun for me. I love, I call it mathematics. It's really probably logic, right? But I just love the mathematics of the games, and I can see the choices designers have made sometimes. With your game here, I certainly can. And it's neat. You kind of understand how the game works all of a sudden, and you feel like you're in on a secret. But yeah, so that's kind of what I had prepared for Expeditions. Is there something
Awesome.
you'd like to talk about otherwise on it, or?
No, I think you covered it really well, and I think this gives people a taste of the type of the level at which you're thinking about these games, which I think is fantastic. And so I hope if someone has watched this and wants to not continue watching about Apiary, that you'll dive into James's video, because I think it's excellent. And it's more graphics too. I haven't found some good photos to pair with this, but his video is a little bit more polished than what we've done here today. But let's jump over to Apiary and talk about a game that I didn't design, but I had a hand in developing, a game that I'm still trying to figure out as a player myself, but I'm having a delightful time with it. Let's talk about Apiary for a few minutes. So I'll pull that up and hopefully find some better images as you're talking about it.
The first thing to say about Apiary is that this is a deeply tactical game. I would compare it to a game like Lost Ruins of Arnak. Not that it's that similar in a mechanical sense or anything. I'm just saying that it's certainly not the same in theme, but it's very tactical. So general statements about this game are difficult, and the video will be talking about specific plays that you need to take or can take if the right tiles and cards are in your possession. But this is one of those interesting games where you play it a few times and you think you know it, you think you're getting good, and then the next game you just get shellacked.
Yeah.
And I like it. It's a challenge. It's something that you have to dig in a little deeper, frankly. If you want to win this game a lot, you're going to have to get very good at it. But let's talk a little bit more specifically. I think one of the main things here is to understand how long the game is. You have to advance 4 Bs to level 4. You're generally going to start with level 2B. If you add it up, that's 15 worker placement turns. And you add in some retrieve actions, and you consider the fact that there is a final turn, and you'll end up with about 20. So you're gonna have about 20 turns. My actual experience is it runs 20 to 24 turns. And it can run a little longer even if people are not doing an effective job of hibernating their beasts. But 2024 is a good estimate. So I need 100 points in this game to beat a good player. That might surprise some people, because the first time you play, you're going to get 45. But it's out there, I promise. So first time I played, I got 45. Right? I mean, that means 5 points a turn. And actually, this is probably the most valuable thing I can tell you about apiaries. You're going to be making tactical decisions based on what's on the board. You'll be thinking 2 or 3 turns in advance. And if you're not getting to 5 points a turn on your 2-3 point plan, you're not doing well. Now, obviously, at the beginning of the game, you're setting up, you're building a little bit. At the end of the game, you need some big turns, right? But you should be thinking about 5 points a turn, and it'll also get you in the right mind frame for this game. Your critical resource here is not honey. Your critical resource is turns. You must think about turns. And if you're wondering how much a certain action costs, think in turns. So that's the biggest strategic idea I think you can take away. Now, how do we think about that a little bit in some more specific cases? One thing I've been thinking a lot about is farms. I've had some huge games playing farms. And the way you do it is you really only need 2 farms, for income purposes. You might have a few for storage, which is another use of farms. But, there's some nice farms in here. There's a farm actually a couple farms that give you 3 points. And there's some really horrific farms in here, like this one, which gives me water and stores water, which are two things I almost never need. So this 3-pointer though, you get a 3-pointer, and maybe you get the one that gives you 3 queens favor, and you put those down. Usually I'd say queen's favor is only worth a half a point, but queen's favor, if you're generating 3 every time you refresh, actually becomes worth a point because you're very likely to get to 25 queen's favor. So if I have those 2 farms, I don't care if I have 4 bees. Every time I have 2 bees on the board or a bee on my landing area, I'm going to refresh, because I'm getting my 5 points. Right? And so get down 2 great farms, refresh 8 times a game at that point, right? I mean, you're thrilled to refresh. So that's the farm strategy. It's dependent on having the right farms. It's depending on playing them early. Obviously, this is one of those things you don't want to do in the last quarter of the game, but it's important. Another core idea I'll give you on the game. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of dominating the
no.
Talk here, but
keep going. That is fascinating.
The other thing I would talk about is I'm struggling about which of the 2 things I'll talk about. I think I'll talk about carvings. Carvings are the biggest scoring opportunity in the game.
I'll try to find the photo again while you're talking about it. Yeah, carvings are they cost honey. They're expensive. Or at least to get there is expensive, but and they're limited. They don't refresh. So
no, they don't refresh, and usually some of them work for you and some of them don't. Most of them have their use, but they may not have a use for you. So let's take this 5 points a turn idea and apply it to honey. The easiest way to get resources in this game is to explore. Generally, I'll be able to get 2 resources of my choice when I explore. I might get 3 resources, but they're probably not of my choice at that point. So if I go to convert and I buy honey, it costs me 3 specific resources, 2 pollen and a water, if I recall. And so to get 3 specific resources twice, because most of these tiles cost 2 honey, is 3 explore turns. And then I have to go convert. That's a 4th turn. And then I will carve with the level 4 worker. That's 5 turns. So 5 times 5 is 25. And you will ask me maybe, or I will ask you, can I score 25 points on a carving? And the answer is occasionally.
Rarely.
But more typical number is 12. So we can immediately determine that this portion of the board is kind of a waste of space and ignore it. But here's the thing. You can teach these dances if you take a level 4 B to the conversion action. And at least in the play groups I've been with, one of the most common things you do with that dance is you make free honey or cheap honey. You exchange 1 point for honey, or you exchange a queen's favor or 2 for honey. And so if you get that conversion set up, okay, fine. I can go to convert with a level 4 worker. I set up cheap honey. I put my cube on it, so if anyone else uses it, I get a very minor benefit. And I can immediately convert up to 4 honey, assuming I have 4 honey storage, which isn't guaranteed. But I can immediately get 4 honey, and now I can buy 2 carvings with that 4 honey, and I've spent 1 turn, right? Now that is a power play, but there's a problem. If I set up that conversion with my level 4 worker, and someone else comes behind me with a level 2 worker and picks up honey, then on the turn after that, they're going to come in and they're going to steal. Somehow they'll always know which one I want. They're going to take the carving I wanted, right? And I'm going to be really unhappy because, I just fed them. And I got a couple queen's favor, maybe, it's like a point to me. So the trick isn't having one level 4 worker, it's having 2 level 4 workers so that you hit the conversion, you make cheap honey, and you go take the first carving. So the trick to this strategy is not knowing it. It's simple. The trick is getting 2 level 4 workers before anyone else does. And assuming you're not specially advantaged by your faction, the way you're going to do that is you're going to play with 2 Bs. You're going to place a B, refresh, place a B, place a B, refresh. And you're going to get 2 level 4 workers about as fast as anyone can. Maybe you could accelerate it some way. Cards is the obvious way, but unfortunately, you probably don't have cards that early in the game. So you're just sitting there turning the wheel as fast as you can to get to 2 level 4 workers. And now think about how well that works if you manage to get a couple decent farms out early. And you can start to see a synergy between the 2 things I've talked about. If I'm going to go worker, refresh, worker, refresh, wouldn't it be awesome if those refresh turns weren't awful? And maybe you can't do quite as good as 5 points every refresh turn that early in the game, but you can get something. And, that's the kind of little engine that might propel you to a pretty amazing score if you have the right carvings out.
So I'm curious with that, James, before you go on, with the landing area option in the game.
Right.
So this is the area of the game where if someone bumps you,
right,
you can get that worker back to your active pool, so you can place it again, or you can place it in your landing area so that you can actually use it for that farm. Do you find yourself, if you do get those 2 really good farms, do you find yourself using the landing area, or is it still not as efficient?
If I have the right farms, I would always use the landing area.
Cool.
If I don't have the right farms, meaning I'm not getting 5 points,
right,
then I would always take the opportunity to do something else. And that's a good example. Actually, that's a great example of what I was saying. It's a tactical game. Yeah. I can tell you the farm strategy. I've won with farm strategy. I've gotten big scores with farm strategy. But sometimes you don't want to do that at all.
Yeah.
You don't have the right farms. You don't have the resources to buy farms. You just have this, the carvings are so good that you don't even want to waste that moment to refresh, even if you're getting points. Right. You just want to keep cranking toward 4 to grab that carving you need. I mean, there's a carving in this game that gives you 1 victory point per queen's favor. I mean, if you have 25 queen's favor and that tile, that's 50 points just there.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, you're probably farming points as well. So you probably have 25 in-game scoring points. You're at 75 points. We haven't scored a carving. We haven't scored anything under the board. This is where, and this game can generate some outsized scores sometimes. This is where it does it, right? Is when you get some crazy combination like that, and suddenly you're starting to move your token not only around the board, but onto the second side, and I don't think it's even healthy to try to do that every game, because there's a certain element of you got the right things when that happens. And also the times I've seen that happen the most often were times when maybe there was an imbalance in the table. Maybe some people were being taught the game and some people who weren't being taught the game. And people weren't competing effectively for the best opportunities. So I'm not saying that everyone should always be aiming to score 120 points or 130 points in this game. I'm just saying that's how it's done. Right? You should aim to score 100 points in this game. And then if the game does run to 24 turns or 25 turns, you'll maybe do a little better. But if the game runs to 20 turns, you get 100 points. You've done everything that made sense, probably. So I mean, that's how I'm thinking about apiary. I've got a script. I'm starting to do a little bit of filming, and this process takes me a while. I enjoy videography, so I mess around with my videos, as you've seen, Jamey. I do a lot of editing, and I try to make them fun. Hopefully, they're fun for me anyway. My wife likes them. that's what board gaming is about, right? I mean, I think sometimes we get so caught up in, the latest greatest, or the rankings, or arguments over this or that, that we forget that this whole hobby is supposed to be about playing games and hanging out with friends. And that's part of what I'm trying to bring. Is not just like a hard nose, like, oh, we're all going to sit around and kill each other by eking out every point, but also just kind of some goofiness. yeah.
When
Um,
I really like that approach to the videos of yours that I've watched, because in general, as a gamer, there are a few other sources for like strategies in games.
right.
There aren't a lot. I wish there were more, but there aren't a lot. But oftentimes I avoid them because I want to discover those strategies on my own. I want,
Yeah.
like,
Fair
that's
enough.
how I get enjoyment out of games, trying different things. But
Mhm.
what I really like about your videos, and even just the way you've talked about them today, is you're not saying this is the thing that you should always do. You're giving a
Right.
framework for a way, like you talked about, think about apiary in terms of turns. And with both expeditions and apiary, you talked about circumstances. Sometimes some of those cards that you mentioned
Right.
aren't going to come up. Some of these tiles aren't going to come up.
Mhm.
And so I really like this about your videos. Anyone who likes this line of thinking, you'll see a bunch of different paths to consider if
Mhm.
circumstances arise.
Mhm.
And I look forward to trying them and just seeing what happens. Like even with the
Right.
2B strategy that you mentioned, getting 2Bs up to level 4 as quickly as possible, there's a lot of paths and branches that can take even within that. So I
Right.
want to try that, but I want to take my own path while doing so. Yeah.
A lot of times, I, you're like, oh, you're a strategy guy. You must always win. Not always. And part of that is that, I'm trying to figure out the game like everybody else. But part of it is, I'll just try something. In the expeditions video, I talk about, oh, I'm going to rush quests early, and that's really not great. That's exactly how I played my first game, right? I mean, because I was just like, oh, what looks fun here? Quests look fun. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got shellacked. you know? I mean, I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe I won't do that again. But
Yeah.
yeah, you just explore the game, try different things, and you'll probably find better strategies than I have. And I hope you do, really. And there's this funny disclaimer at the front of my videos that I've always put in, which is, if you're a grandmaster, this isn't for you. And it's because of this philosophy I have, which is at one time I played chess a little bit, competitively, but not very well. And but that means I'd memorized a few dozen openings to 10 moves. It means I had studied books and books and books about chess. And it was actually, I got a chance to play with a guy who had a master rating, and I realized, oh, I'm either going to have to spend my life on chess or
Uh-huh.
stop. And I pretty much never played again.
Hmm. Uh-huh.
And, so I don't want to turn board games into that, right?
Right.
We still want to have fun. We still want to explore. We don't want to have to sit around memorizing charts all day.
Right.
Um, you know, uh, but still, in a world where people have big collections and sometimes they don't play games as many times as they might,
Yeah.
um, they may have a hard time exploring and understanding the game without a little help. And that's another thing that maybe a video like this could help someone with. I don't know.
When I do hear the question, every now and then someone pops up in one of our Facebook groups and they say, I love this game. I've played it a dozen times. I know I'm going to play it another dozen times, but I never win. And I'd love to do better at the game. And I
Yeah.
love that your channel serves that person really, really well because they already know the game. They don't need to have the game taught to
Right.
them. They're not looking for a review. They're looking to go deeper into a game they already love. And I think your videos do an excellent job of doing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, especially from you. That means a lot.
Well, thanks, James. I appreciate your time today. These tips, I'm excited to play apiary now after you've given these tips and see how I can do with it. We'll link below. So again, James hasn't filmed the apiary video, but I'm going to time the release of this so that you can go
Right.
right from this video and go right over to that apiary video. The expeditions video is already out and you can check it out. You can share your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure James would love to hear your strategy tips, what
Absolutely.
you've tried and haven't tried. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, James. I really, really appreciate this.
Yeah, Jamey, thank you. And thanks for making so many games I've enjoyed. I mean, It's cool.
Well, thanks, James. I'll keep trying to do that.